Alright guys, this is going to be my initial review of the Nikon Z8. Towards the end, I will talk about the big news about Nikon buying out RED. To prove this video isn't sponsored by Nikon. Just the mug that Sony sent me. So first, just to address the elephant in the room, I know a bunch of you guys are gonna be asking if I'm switching to Nikon. Please stop asking if I'm switching to anything. I use all cameras. I own pretty much a camera from every company at this point, and I use whatever I need to use. Like whatever tool best fits the job, that's the tool that I use. Like this whole like brand loyalty thing, it drives me crazy. So no, I'm not switching to anything. I'm a filmmaker. I'm not a camera salesman. I mean, I never had too much interest in Nikon initially, but in one of my Fujifilm videos, someone commented, I kind of talk about this in my ZF video. Someone commented saying how the Nikon had custom curves that you can change in within the camera. Well, that led me to hitting up Nikon, and Nikon went and let me try out their ZF. I ended up falling in love with this. They let me keep it. Currently, this is like my favorite stills camera to use just because it's full frame and it has that film vibe. You see brass knobs on there. I'm pairing it up with Voigtlander lenses. Yeah, then that led to Nikon including me on a Z8 project. I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but it will be out very soon. And that was super fun. I'm super grateful that Nikon included me on that. They sent me out a Z8 and let me keep this. While doing the project, you know, part of our job as filmmakers, and if you're a DP or whatever, you know, if it's a new camera, it's our job, our responsibility to learn every nook and cranny of that camera, seeing what its upsides are, where its downsides are, and knowing how to best utilize it, because every camera is different. They're all different tools. You can use them for different things. The first thing that I noticed about this camera was the image qualities. Nikon's literally throwing everything that they have in this camera. It's pretty mind-blowing. I think the biggest thing is we have NRaw, so literally an internal RAW format, 12-bit color format internally. It also does ProRes RAW, and it does ProRes HQ and the H.265. It gives us everything. But more importantly, a lot of times when cameras are like, oh, like, and I should mention this is an 8K sensor. A lot of times when it's an 8K sensor, it's like, oh, it's gonna be pixel bending or it's gonna downsample it. It only goes up to 30 frames per second. There's always like workarounds for it. Not with this thing. And the Nikon NRaw 12-bit color, you can shoot up to 8K 60 frames per second. Full frame. Not only that, it also downsamples the 8K into a 4K NRaw 12-bit color. I didn't know that was possible, so I don't know how they're doing that, because I thought technically RAW you couldn't downsample, but I don't see why you couldn't. So that is an option here. There is one quirk and an issue, I would say, with that. We'll get into that after, you know, we talk more about this. And another really cool thing is you can actually do 4K 120 downsample from the 8K. So again, I don't know how they're doing any of this, but it is insane, especially for a mirrorless body. Like there's like, I can only think like RED cameras that can do that powerful type things in RAW. In the NRaw, again, 12-bit color, 8K full sensor readout, you could do 8K 60 and 4K 120. That's wild. That is, I don't know any other camera that's doing that, especially in a mirrorless. Obviously, there's cinema cameras out there that's quadruple the price of this, if not more, that can do that. So yeah, that image quality alone, I think, is the thing that makes this camera like worth having. But now let's talk about the quirks a little bit. So let me go back and backtrack a little bit to that NRaw issues. Right before we get into that though, I wanna talk about this guy real quick. This is by PGY Tech. This is an SD card holder here, but more importantly, this doesn't just hold SD cards. This actually is a memory card reader. How many times have you guys taken all your SD cards, but then you forget an SD card reader and you're trying to transfer footage on set? And because now you can just do both at once. It has this rugged exterior on there. And how does it work? Just simply hit this little orange tab here. The little USB-C cable comes out right there. Initially, when I saw this, I thought, oh, it's probably gonna be like a slow SD card reader. No, it's like up to speed on all the modern readers out there. So you're not gonna have to worry about, you know, slow transfer speeds or anything like that. The weird thing that I was finding, an NRaw downsample 8K into 4K at 24 frames per second, the blacks, they clip and they have a hue shift. But once you go to that 4K 60, all of a sudden the color and the dynamic range matches the standard NRaw 8K full readout. I don't know what the issue is. So when it came time to go do my project, I didn't want to deal with that. And so I just went to the ProRes HQ, and the ProRes HQ matches with the 8K RAW perfectly, you know, when it talks about dynamic range and color specifically. So that's one major quirk in this. I don't know what the issue is with that. I think Nikon can easily probably fix that through a firmware, but I was a little bit bummed because I do really want to use the NRaw on here, you know, where it's giving us 12-bit RAW control, around the same file size that the ProRes HQ is giving you, which is again pretty wild. But when it comes to using the ProRes HQ, the colors and everything matches amazing to the 12-bit RAW. Circling back a little bit to the image quality, the dynamic range on this camera is wild. It's probably some of the best that I've used in a hybrid body like this. And also the 8K is insanely punchy in the downsampled 4K as well. Now let's talk about the body a little bit. Quality wise, it feels like a tank. Size wise, you know, it's closer to a traditional DSLR, but maybe a little bit thinner. Personally, I you know, prefer smaller bodies. One really cool thing on here is though that we do have waveforms. Something that small is mind-blowing that other cameras don't have that. Especially, I don't know too many mirrorless cameras. I think Panasonic does it. You know, there's not a whole lot of waveform options out there. So just little tools like that, you can tell Nikon's really aiming at filmmakers. Now, in order to set up this camera, the menu's kind of a mess. You know, I feel like they kind of just threw everything. It's like you have your video menu and everything's under that video menu. And then sometimes when you think there's like a customization option, you think it's gonna be in the video menu, it's in the menu with the pencil, and it's the same thing where it's a little bit organized, but it's kind of, I don't know, kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I personally think it's the responsibility of the filmmaker to understand the menus. So I don't want to say that the menus are bad. Again, they're still just, they're new to me, they're fresh. So it's it's my responsibility to learn them, but they definitely don't feel the most intuitive. I can say that off the bat. This is such a powerhouse of a video camera that I feel like Nikon should come out with a dedicated cinema menu on here that kind of simplifies everything and, you know, presents everything a little bit more for a filmmaker rather than a hybrid setup, which again, they just bought RED, so we'll see. I'll get into that more here in a second. The biggest gripe that I have with this camera, this is great for photographers, but again, they're making this a powerhouse video camera and there's no flip out screen. To me, that's kind of like, there's so many times where I want to use this camera, but I end up not using it because there's no flip out screen. Whether it's something like this, like I would love to be able to use this camera just for a talking head segment like this, but you know, I need the flip out screen to see what I'm doing and set up my scene and everything. I think if you're someone that's looking in this camera and you're planning on rigging it out, you don't have to worry about that obviously, but you know, when you're on a gimbal and stuff and all that, it helps to have a flip out screen. So I think it's kind of crazy that they didn't put one on here. And I don't think this is possible, but if Nikon could create some kind of adapter to undo the screen and make it into a flip out, I don't know, I think it'd be worth it, like well worth it. Now, the last thing I'll touch about the body, and then we'll go into the whole RED thing. The Nikon ZMount's the largest mount out there. Out of any of these mirrorless mounts, the Nikon ZMount is the largest. But with that, you can actually adapt E-mount lenses to this ZMount mount. That's like crazy. I didn't know that was possible. I actually have that mount on my ZF right now. So I bought these Voigtlander. It's a 21mm and a 50mm. The Voigtlander lenses kind of have like that vintage look and character while still keeping it sharp. And these are E-mount lenses, so I could still use this on any of my Sony bodies if I needed to. And then with this adapter on here, you know, the lenses perform as if it was on a Sony camera. It's pretty freaking crazy. So now let's talk about how Nikon bought RED. Nikon pretty much just put down the BDE, you know, if you guys know what that means. I think this is pretty freaking cool. I don't really know what the general tone has been around this, but I think it's really exciting. I feel like a lot of the camera space is more about tech now rather than actual storytellers and filmmakers. I think that's just, you know, what our community is. What's exciting to me is one, Canon has kind of made some moves where I don't feel like they're really looking out for their community and their people and their audience and, you know, the people that are investing into their camera stuff, because their lens options are very limited. Like Canon's RF lenses are amazing lenses, but we need more options. Being limited to solely just Canon lenses, you know, that's kind of silly. Where every other camera brand, you can pretty much buy, you know, any other lens for it. I think it's gonna be super exciting if RED does introduce ZMount to the RED system, because it's way more versatile. One, you know, the mount's open, so Tamron, Sigma, and all these other lens companies, you know, they can make lenses for that mount. Second, if this happens, that means if you're like a Sony FX3 shooter, FX6, FX9, whatever it is, and you have a bunch of lenses for that, well, if RED puts on a Z-mount onto their bodies, you could then use that E-mount adapter and use all your Sony glass on a RED camera. I think that's really exciting. I think that's really cool. Second, I think this is going to bring us some insane collaborations on new cameras. This Z8 alone, like again, when I was using it and I was messing with the image quality, I was blown away. It reminds me of like cinema camera image quality And a lot of people are like, oh, you could, yeah, I get it. But you have to imagine now the innovation that's going to come, because obviously Nikon is crushing it when it comes to hybrid bodies, but they don't have any cinema bodies. So imagine now if, you know, we get a cinema body that can allow the sensor to run a little bit hotter and keep it cool, and also push a processor and push more power to it with this 8K sensor. Like imagine if they push the sensor even more. And then imagine if they give us like a red raw option where there's actual different compressions on there. Again, nothing kind of touches red raw. Like the color fidelity and the image quality that you get out of a red camera, it's still some of the best. Like no other camera I've seen has been able to touch that. That's in like the mirrorless realm. Now, just to wrap this up, my final word on the Z8 in my wish list, I have it written down right here. So since Nikon's being so bullish with this, and again, this is some of the best image quality I've used out of a mirrorless body. I own the Sony a7R5. I own the FX3 6, Komodo X, Komodo. And since they're being so bullish, Nikon, please give us open gate. If Panasonic can do it, you guys can do it. If you guys put open gate on this, this is gonna be like my go-to anamorphic camera. But if you do bring open gate, you guys need to bring anamorphic support. Now, obviously, yes, external monitors can run it, but sometimes it's just easier to do it in camera. Final, the image quality that's coming out of this is so stunning to the point where I wish we had a better dedicated cinema menu style on here. We do have a back switch back here to go from photo and video mode. So if you guys could do that, it'd be sick if you could do that. When I had the Canon R5C, it did that, but it was sluggish. That whole camera overall was kind of like, so, you know, if Canon could do it, you guys could easily do that, because this is way more powerful of a camera than the R5 and the R5C. So that's pretty much it. Again, not a super intense video here. I was just really excited to talk about this camera, and I thought this would be the perfect time just, you know, to have a discussion with you guys, you know, especially around the whole red thing. Like, this is wild, truly exciting times. If anybody has an issue with it, you know, I don't go buy a laptop and put a lens on it or something. I don't know. I actually have a cold, so I need to go rest and try to edit this. And yeah, peace.